Alright, rock stars. This is going to be the first video for the Jedi Battle series. This is going to cover more real-life type scenarios and labs, configuration exercises, and also viewer requests. So a little bit more advanced. I want to preface this by saying you should be comfortable with the basics of networking, the basics of TCP/IP. You should be somewhat familiar with Cisco routers and switches. You should be able to, at the very least, log on, look at the running commands, being able to configure IP addresses on interface, just kind of some basic activities. We're going to start today with the password reset, and as we go through this series, maybe build on more complex scenarios and whatnot, but I feel this is a good exercise to kind of clear the air and maybe get our feet wet with this, all right? So as we start, one of the first things I want to point out is you need a tool or piece of software to go about in configuring. I think most of the labs will use the default hyperterminal built into Windows. Personally, I'm not a fan on it. It's kind of limited. One of the tools that I recommend is Putty. There's other ones out there, Terraterm and whatnot. Putty's the one that I've used and just gotten familiar with. I'd say any of the ones out there, honestly, are better than the default hyperterminal. Specifically if you want to output your session to a log file or if you want to have multiple profiles saved. So Putty, you can download it throughout the internet. I think one of the best places is here, ninite.com, ninite.com. Let me actually go to the default page. I think this is a really cool website. There's many actually applications that you can go through and check that you want, whether it's the browser or maybe something like iTunes or whatnot. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, you will see Putty right here. This is the guy that we want. One thing that Putty has that hyperterminal doesn't also is the ability to support SSH. And that is, think of it for all practical purposes as the encrypted version of Telnet. So you check Putty, you say get the installer, and you can go through and download it. We'll probably have the guy pop up. We're going to cancel though because I have him installed. So right now I'm using a console connection directly connected to the router. The router right now is just sitting in a lab environment. It is not connected to a production network or anything like that. So again, this lab is going to be a password recovery. Many reasons. You could order a router online and you want to use kind of a fresh restart, or a more complicated scenario would be this is a production router and it was set up by maybe your predecessor and you do not have the credentials to get in, yet you want to make sure you preserve that existing configuration. So that's what this lab is going to cover. We're kind of going to go with the latter scenario since it's a little bit more complicated. So just to illustrate here, we do this and we're prompted for a username. I have no idea what the username would be and certainly no idea what the password would be. So what we have to do is a password recovery process on this. So what we need to do is have physical access to the router. You cannot do this remotely. You cannot do this via Telnet or SSH. You have to be at the router physically to do this. So what I'm going to do is turn the router off, turn it back on, and as I do that, continuously press the break key. That is going to interrupt his boot cycle and take him into a low-level mode called ROM monitor. So it takes a second, and let me tell you, you can miss it a couple times. Sometimes I have to reboot 2 or 3 times in a row to get it to work correctly. All right. Maybe I should do it a little bit more rhythmically. Punk rock album, the tapping of the Cisco keyboard. Oh my god, kids, don't even want to tell you how many times I had to freaking do that on rapid fire, pushing the button as fast as possible. It can really be a pain in the ass. Okay, so here we are, interrupting the boot cycle. You just have to be lightning fast. I would say, you know what, as fast as you can possibly hit that key, rapid fire. Old school days, like you were playing Street Fighter 2 back in the arcades, that is how fast you need to hit that goddamn break key. Okay, so here we are in ROM monitor, this low-level mode. So the first thing that we want to do is change the configuration register, which tells the router how to boot, to a value that says ignore your startup configuration, reload the router with the system defaults. For this particular model, it's 2142 is the value. How do I know what value it is? Well, you have to look online at Cisco.com. So first, let me actually show you some of the commands that you have available here. Let's try that again. There we go. Notice the number increases as you enter more commands. So the one that we're specifically looking for is this guy right here, configuration register. So I'm going to enter that command, and the value is 0x2142. That is going to tell this router reload, ignoring the startup configuration, and load with the router defaults. So let's do that. We have to restart. We actually have to restart twice. Once to apply this, and then once to restart back from ROM monitor mode into the normal mode. So here we go here. He's now applied that configuration register change. Reloading. All right, here we go. There we go. Now, just as a little bit of a heads up, you'll notice right here that it says decompressing. This right here, this is the firmware that is in the flash of the router. That is actually in a compressed format. It has to decompress that and load that into the memory of the router itself. So it's kind of going through that. It takes a minute. We'll actually get some messages here as the interfaces load up saying, oh hi, we have all of these Ethernet interfaces. Oh no, there's nothing plugged into them. We have to take them back down. It's also going to try to go through the default setup, which is kind of like a scripted setup. Do you want to go into the initial configuration mode, and then it's like a wizard-based utility that guides you configuring these basic settings of the router. For instance, the router name, the interface IP addresses, whatnot. We're actually going to say no to this. All right, return to get started, and you'll see the messages popping up now for the interfaces. And there we go. Okay. So here we are. Now, again, I said there's two scenarios. One where you care about preserving that startup configuration, one where you don't. I'm going to be covering the first one. All right, the one where you don't care about it, that's fine. At this point, you're done. You do a copy run start that's going to overwrite everything, and you're good to go. Start configuring it from the ground up. If, however, you must preserve that configuration, then it's a little bit more critical. So one thing I want to do, first we go into enable mode, and we're going to do a show start. So this is the configuration that was already preserved there. There's actually, not a whole lot. I configured an IP address. I made sure that the console required the local login, and I configured an account to use. So what we can do is use PuTTY to dump that to a file to preserve that, first of all, in case anything goes wrong. Now, one thing that you can do so you don't have to continuously page, it's terminal length. Terminal length 0. So that means when I do show start, it's going to go through one smooth motion with no breaks. So it's going to be a little bit smoother for capturing the output. Come on. See that? All one smooth motion. So what we do in PuTTY, you go into change settings, you go here into logging, you want the printable output. We're going to browse to the desktop, and we'll just call this backup.log. Hit save, apply, go through, show start. Again, we're not interested in the running config, we're interested in the preserved startup configuration. Hit enter. Alright, we'll go back here now and go to change settings again. Go here, do none. Alright, and just for the record, it's not quite on screen. Here we go. So we have a nice copy here saved on my desktop. All else fails, I now have a notepad copy. But we're going to even show you how to do this a little bit smoother. So now what we need to do is to load this startup config into the active running memory. And a point of note here, a point of caution, when you are doing a copy run start, where you are copying the contents of active memory into the startup config, it is a wipe and replace. However, when we're doing the opposite, which is what we're going to do now in the case of a password recovery, when you're doing copy, start, run, copying the contents of the startup config in Flash into the running memory, it is a merge. So only specifically configured lines will be wiped and erased. Why is that important? Well, in this particular instance, the user account used to log in. So the first thing that we do is we do a copy, start, run. Now our running config is going to have all of those. Notice that, you know, the host changed. If we do show run now, we'll see. Oh, that's right, terminal length. So again, terminal length, we'll set it, I think the default is 22, something like that. So show run. Now we can parse through it again. So, you know, the user account that's here and whatnot. So now what we want to do, go into config mode, make a user account that we do have credentials for. So username, Jedi, privilege 15. Make sure, this is very important because in the newer syntaxes, this may not be on your CCNA. The newer syntaxes, you have to define the highest privilege level for this account because the default will be just a privilege 1 account. Privilege 15 is what you need for admin. Secret, when you hit 0, that says it's going to be the text that follows is unencrypted. If you have a pre-configured MD5 hash, you can paste it here, but we're not going to do that. And we'll just set something like password. All right. And again, let's go out here, do a copy, run, start. Let's verify our startup config. Make sure everything's good so that we are, next time we reboot. So there's the 2 accounts. You can delete the old one. I'm not going to go through that right now, but the IP address is saved, the host name is saved. If you look at the console and telnet settings, it's set to use the local accounts. So we're good to go. There's one other thing that we have to do. Do you happen to know what it is? Well, I'm going to give you a hint. Let's say we're good. We've fixed the router. Now we're going to power it down, ship it back to the data center or the recovery site, wherever that happens to be. So we power it off. Let's just do a reload. We've done copy, right? We've just to verify, our last command entered was copy run start. So we have now copied into the startup config. We looked at the startup config, so we should be good. Right? Well, watch what happens at this point when I do a reload. Alright, this is obviously going to take a couple minutes. While it's reloading, let me take a side step here and say we're going to have some other kind of intermediate level labs where we're going through maybe firmware updates or basic router configuration, setting up templates and whatnot. As we get more advanced, we're going to have multiple routers in a topology. We're going to have, say, a simulated WAN connection involving multiple sites that will be represented by cities. As requests come in from the viewers, I will try to accommodate those. I have a reasonably extensive lab, so scenarios that I get requests on can be reviewed here. All right, here we go. It's decompressing the image. All right. Now, watch what it does here in the next couple seconds. Loading. 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 Oh, no. Loading. 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 Story of your life in IT. Forever. Loading. There we go. Going through. Look at this. It's taking you back into the initial configuration wizard. Why is it doing that? Remember, one of the first things we did was change that configuration register to the value 2142. We now need to restore that value back to what it was, because every time it reloads, it's going to say ignore your startup config and now go with the system defaults. So, going through this again, we're going to do copy from the startup to the run. make sure we're good, do a show run to make sure we're happy. A little bit of keyboard lag there. Lovely. Then we have to do from copy run to start. Or actually, no, the startup config should be good. Let's verify that. Show start. Yes. So, our configuration register is not set to the default value. It is set to 2142. You can use the command show version to verify that. This will actually show you a lot of useful information. For instance, the hardware platform, the particular version and feature set of the firmware that you're using. But look right here at the bottom, it's still set to 2142. So we need to go into configuration mode and take care of that. Easy command, config register. In this case, the default value is 2102. Again, how do I know that? I go to cisco.com and do password recovery and give it my particular model of router, which is the 800 series. So 0x2102. All right. Just for good measure, do another copy run start. And do a show version to make sure our configuration register has now been updated. All right. It will be this at the next reload. Now we'll reload again, make sure that we're all good to go. This last step is probably one of the more common ones that is overlooked as administrators are freaking out, gasping their chests in panic and fear. All of my work gone? No, you just need to remember to change the configuration register back. I think it's probably a mistake that everyone makes at least once. All right, so it's going to the flash, decompressing it. And by the way, this is only an 800 series router. When you work on service provider class routers, like a 3000 series or 3900, or even the large ones, the 7000 series, a reload is not a couple minutes like this. Reload can be 20 to 30 minutes. So obviously not something that you do lightly in a production network. All right, so it's going through. Should be good here. Loading. 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 Definitely something that you get used to in the IT field. All right, there we go. And look at that. We're now in good shape. It's going to take a second because, again, it has to check the interfaces, saying, oh, we have interfaces, oh, but they're not connected. And here we go. So entering our command, Jedi, password, and now we're logged in. We have done a password recovery while preserving the existing configuration. So as you can imagine, this is like absolutely critical. You know, not something you're going to memorize, not something you're going to do often, something that's very well documented on Cisco's website. But I recommend everyone go through this a couple times in a home lab, get confident with the procedure, and that way when it happens to you in the real world, you'll have gone through all of these little blips and checks. Oh, make sure you restore your config register. Make sure you preserve a running copy. As I said here, on the desktop, I saved a backup copy to a text file. So worst case scenario, I still had something to go back to if all else failed.